The most visible change in iOS 14 is the addition of widgets, information from your apps that appear on the home screen. Widgets are in many ways the watchOS complications for iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. And if you've worked with complications a lot, this was going to look very familiar. I put together a starting project for you. It's a simple app which displays our widget views and the stages of the pizza delivery. We'll make a widget to launch this app. Our first step is to add the extension. So we just have an app here, and I'm going to go over here to File and go to New, Target, and I'll filter over here for widget. And I'm going to use the iOS one. Here's a widget extension, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Next. And it asks for a product name, and I usually put widget at the name end of it. So we have Pizza Time as the name, so I'll use Pizza Time Widget. And then we go down here. You want to make sure you got Include Configuration Intent off. That's an even more advanced topic, but we'll talk about it at some other tip. Now, right here, we want to make sure our project is Pizza Time, and we're going to actually embed it in Pizza Time. So this is all correct now. I'm going to go ahead and hit Finish. It'll ask me to activate, and I'll go ahead and activate this. And you'll see right here, I've got another group called Pizza Time Widget. It's got a few extra things. We're going to be using mostly this item right here, the Pizza Time Widget.swift file. But before we do, I'm going to have to do a couple of extra steps. So I'm going to close up the preview for the moment. And I'm going to pop open here my target membership, because we're going to use a lot of the stuff up here in the widget. So I'm going to take the stages and the 3 delivery views I got here and my assets. And all of those, I want to have a target membership of Pizza Time Widget extension so that these will be able to be used down here, because I'm going to share all this up. Okay, and once I've done that, I can now go into this Pizza Time Widget.swift. And if you go down the bottom of the code here, you'll see that it's got a preview provider. Widgets are exclusively a Swift UI thing. You'll notice one difference here, though. This has a preview context modifier, and it takes a widget preview context, which has a family, which in this case is set to system small. But for now, we're going to leave that alone, and I'm going to move up a bit in the code here to where it says entry view. And you'll find that there are entry view structs here, and that is where you're going to stick your code from here, which I'm going to use the delivery view, to display on the widget. Now, this is on a timeline. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff on timelines. That's going to be our third part of the lesson. But we're going to do a little bit now with it, and that's because there are entries we need, and we're going to need a single entry. And we still got to set up the entries properly for this. So what I'm going to do is go over here where it says date. And this is a simple entry. It's a timeline entry. You generally will need a date for a timeline entry so that it can know when it's going to fire and show up on the screen. We're also going to need some data in the timeline entry that we're going to now pass to the widget that will tell the widget what it's going to look like and what it's going to do. So I'm going to add something I called stage, which is just an int. And it's the number, it's a stage. If you can actually see it here, I'll go over to assets. You can see I've got a whole bunch of stages here of pizza delivery. Okay. And so I'm just going to set it to stage. And of course, by changing simple entry, you see I got a whole bunch of errors. And the reason for that is we have a whole bunch of places that are going to use the simple entry as my timeline entry. So we've got here, for example, placeholder. Placeholder shows a generic placeholder as the assets are loading. And it's going to take this entry and turn it into rectangles. Now, I got to finish this one off again by adding the stage, the parameter. And I can add whichever one I want here, but I'm just going to add one for this one. Underneath that, I got to do the same thing, which is for the snapshot. The snapshots are used as a preview when adding widgets. So I'm going to add a stage 0 here, which is just showing me my pizza, which is a nice one to show. And then we get underneath that to the timeline. And again, I'll talk about timeline in the third part of this. But for now, I'm just going to delete what's here. And we're going to add one entry to the timeline. And you can see we've got an array of simple entries, which is going to be our timeline entries. And I'm going to add one of those to my timeline below, which takes an entries. So I'm going to do entries dot append. And I'll take a simple entry. Which is date and stage. And I'll make a date of date and a stage of 0 for right now, which shows us a pizza, actually. Now, underneath that, the entries then become part of the timeline, as you can see here. Now, it's also got this thing called policy. Policy, again, I'll talk more about it later, but as you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different policies you can have: at, end, never, and after. After was inserted at a specific date that you would start to refresh your timeline. If you have a timeline and it ends, then it will be automatically refreshed with an at end, which is what was already set to. But we're going to go with a manual system here. So I'm going to use never. And we're just going to set the policy to never for now. And we still got one more to go. And that's all the way down here at our simple entry for the preview. So I'm going to go right after the date here, comma, and we'll put stage 0 because it's such a pretty pizza. And we're set on that. Now I'm going to close this up and we can see what we've got so far with a command option return, and we can get our preview back. And we've got one more step to go here. You can see the preview is set to some standard one, which is 11:11 a.m. And if you go up here to where it says Pizza Time Widget Entry View, you're going to change right here. And we'll move this from text to Delivery View. And you see Delivery View takes a stage. And you see stage is binding. So because we got a binding, I'm going to use a constant here. And that constant comes from entry, which is a simple entry. And of course, then I'll just take the stage from that. And by doing that, you can see on our preview, we've got an ordered pizza here, and it says order a pizza. So this is what it's going to look like when we actually put it on a phone. Now we can test this. As you notice up here, we've got two schemes. I've got the app scheme and I do have an extension scheme. And I want to be in the extension scheme for this. And if I run this, on our phone, we get the widget. Now this is really nothing more than a big button right now. And if you click it, it will click and go right into the app. And then you can hit Command-Shift-H to go out and you're back there. And so that's all it really does right now. It's a glorified one of these guys. But that's what it works like so far. We've been using only one of three families. So we've got over here, for example, the small family. But there's also a large and a medium family. You identify the supported families in the Pizza Time Widget method in the Supported Families modifier. So let's go take a look at that real quick. And if you go down to Pizza Time Widget here, you see right over here that we don't have something called the supported family. Now, I left this default, which gives us all, and that's a really bad idea. It's much better to always put in the supported families, because otherwise things start stretching and distorting to support all the families. So put in here supported families, and then it asks for a collection of supported families, and we're going to start this one with just the system small, and let's do system medium here, like that. And above that is more identifying information. So I'm going to change this. Instead of saying my widget, we'll make it Huli Pizza Delivery. And underneath that, for the description, the widget to know where your pizza is. Now, I have a view set up for this already, and it was one of the ones we imported earlier, and that's the one over here on Medium. So I can go ahead and hit the build on that. And you can see here what we did was we moved all the text off of the image and moved it over to the side here. Now, we've got this. Now, how am I going to figure out which one I'm going to use? So let's go back down into Pizza Time Widget and go to the entry view, which we have up here. And right now, we have it set constantly as just a delivery view. There is an environment variable widget family to find out which family the user picked, or if they've picked more than one. So what you're going to do is you're going to declare an environment variable here in the entry view. So I'll do @environment, and that is called widget family. And then we're going to call that var family. Okay. And then down underneath here, I'm going to put a switch family. And I'll have 3 cases. System small. Case system medium, and I'll use a default for right now. Okay, and then for each one of these, I got to put one in as it's complaining about, and I'll just cut that, and I'm going to put it in all 3 first. And this is medium. And I'll leave the delivery view as my default. So everything is pretty much set here. And so what will happen is it'll know which family it is, and it'll pick the right family. Okay, so now we can run this as part of the extension. So I'm going to stop it and run it. And we got our pizza time right here. And I'm going to long click it, and it says Edit Home Screen. And I can go up to the top here, and you hit the plus button. Hit OK first, and then hit the plus. And you can look for widgets, and there is pizza time right there. And you'll see that it gives us that text, Huli Pizza Delivery, the widget you know where your pizza is. And we have 2 widgets that are defined here. We have our small one, and here is our medium one. And I'm going to click on that one, add the widget, and now I have that widget on my screen, and I can hit Command-Shift-H to stop edit, and I have both of them on my screen. Now, there's also a large size widget, but I'd use it sparingly. It takes up 16 icons on the home screen, and that's a lot of real estate. But let's put it in to show you how it looks. So first of all, I'm going to go over to the code for this, and so I'll close up the app and go over here to Delivery View Large, which is what we've got. And I'm going to go ahead and resume this. And there we go. There's one style thing wrong with this. Widgets should have curved edges as much as possible, especially in any of these shapes around them. So for example, where I have my text, I've got sharp edges, and so I really need to be dealing with that. Now, we could use corner radius here, but there's an automatic way for doing this for widgets. So if you go down to where it says background, here in the code, you see it says background color ochre. I'm going to comment that out, and I'm going to use a different background setup for this, okay? And so do a dot background, and there's a shape you can use called a container relative shape. And as you see, it's already curving that. I'm going to want to keep that ochre, so I'm going to change my fill on that shape. So I'll do a dot fill to the shape, and I'll make it a color ochre. which I have in my assets catalog. And there we go. Now, the curves here are corners based on how close the edge is. So you see we've got padding down here of 8. And we got one down here for 12 for the trailing. But let's just go with this one right here. I'm going to change this to 30 and watch what happens. The further it gets away from the edge, the sharper the corners get. If I move this down to 12, you see it gets pretty rounded on some of those corners. And I'm still liking 8, so I'm going to go back to 8 here, like that. So, yeah, make sure you get those rounded corners in there. Now, we can add this to the supported families. Though I can do this by commenting everything out, I just always like to do it with the actual literal entry. So I'm going to go down here. Supported families, system large. And I'm going to just copy this. Change this to large. And change this to large. All right, now I'm going to run this and add that widget. And let's just get rid of this one while I'm at it too. So I'm going to remove the widget here. And then I'm going to do it again. Edit the home screen. And hit add. Pizza time. And there's the medium. And there's our large. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and add the widget. And hit done up top here. And you can see how big it is. So you've pretty much taken up a good half of your screen like this. Even on a Pro Max like I've got here, or possibly an iPad, there's just a lot of space taken up. You'd use a screen this size for a display and maybe some deeper links, but for a simple informational piece like this, it's probably way too big, and you probably won't make a large for these kinds of things. Widgets are not meant to be static like the ones we have here. They're meant for a quick glance at relevant changing information. In our pizza app, we're informing the user of the delivery stages of a pizza. Now, I have a model that I've already set up of this, which is stages.swift up here. And you can see there it is. It's just a simple array of strings. And I'm going to go through the stages of making and delivering the pizza. Now, I'm going to go back down to the pizza time widget here. And let's go to where all this happens is get timeline in completion. And so here in this method, we build a timeline of dates that say, okay, we have a new event. I want you to change the view here. So we're going to go through that. Now, the best way to do this, depending on what you're doing, is you probably get it from a server or something like that. You'd probably, have some notifications, or you'd pull it from the server, whatever. I'm going to do it very simply. We're going to just do a loop. So let's start that loop by getting a date. So let's get let date equals date. And then we'll set up a nice little loop here for stage in. And we'll just do for all the stages, 0 dot dot stages dot count. And then in that loop, we'll do two things. First thing I'm going to do is create a scheduled time for this. And the way I'll do it is I'm going to do by 3 seconds. So do let scheduled equal the date plus, and then I'm going to put in parentheses here, double, and I'll put the stage in here. And I'm going to multiply that by 3.0. So what I end up doing with this is I can multiply by 3.0, and this will make for an offset of the date equal to the stage. And so I have a set of stages every 3 seconds. The next step I have to do is then append this to the entries. I have an entry append right here. So I'm going to save myself a little typing. And I'm going to copy and paste it in. And what I'm going to do is change two things. We'll change the date to be scheduled. And I'm going to change which stage I'm at. And that's going to be stage. And that loop will now create the timeline of the various stages that we'll see when we run the app. Now, underneath this, I left this append here. And the reason I do that is because I want to reset it back to this order of pizza that we have right here. And I like that pizza. I like reminding people after they've finished eating their pizza, or even when they're still eating their pizza, that they should really order another one and so I can make more money. So let's go ahead and go over here to the date here. And I'm going to change this date. And I'm going to give it an offset too. And that offset is going to be very similar to this offset with one change. Again, I'm going to use a double here because that's an integer. And it's going to be stages.count. And then I'm going to multiply that times 3.0. So that says, okay, so that's the end of my stages will be 3.0. And then I'll add an extra 3 seconds. So it'll take a little bit longer time on the end. And that will be by reset timeline entry. And the reason I want that is because this is going to be a manual timeline entry and it'll stop. You'll see down here in let timeline, the next step of this is these entries will now be part of the timeline here. But you also get this thing called a policy, which I mentioned in the first video on widgets. And let's go back into here so I can show you this again. You'll see that there are 3 options here. The first one here is after. After refreshes get timeline and gets new timeline entries at a specific date. The other option here, at end, refreshes the timeline when it runs out of entries. These 2 are automatic so that you don't really have to do anything. But in the case of our app and our widgets, we're going to be using never because this is going to be a completely manual process. When a customer presses the order pizza button, they're going to start that sequence. And it's going to end after we are finished with that sequence. So I'm going to use never here. There's only one little problem with never is how do I get it started? All right, now that we're going to need some extra work in the content view itself. But before we do that, I'm going to slide down here to where it says Pizza Time Widget, and you'll see this one called Kind. Kind is an identifier of our widget, and it comes in handy when we're going to do this next step. So I'm going to take the kind here, which is a string, and I'm just going to copy that for the moment. And I'm going to be able to use it here in Content View. And you'll see in Content View, I have an action, order action, which is the action for my button down here. And it's already got something it does with the app, which is it changes the pictures if I wanted to preview them. But for the widget, I'm going to do something else. And that is I'm going to use a control center that will handle widgets. And it's called, of course, Widget Center. And like many of these, like Notification Center and the like, it's a singleton called shared. And it has some reload methods. 2 of them. One is reload timelines of kind, and one is reload all timelines. Now, the all timelines one will do all of the timelines for all the widgets. You're probably not going to want to do that because that's a big processor load. Instead, it's much better to be specific about which one you're going to be doing. And so I'm going to do reload timelines of kind, like I have here. And I have my kind already set, so I'm just going to do a Command V, and that's the Pizza Time widget. And so what I've done is if I use this Widget Center shared reload timelines of kind and put that in my app, it will then trigger the get timeline when I need it in the widget itself. So we're going to go ahead and I'll stop the app and we'll go ahead and run this. And you'll notice something happen almost immediately is that we're already getting pictures. That's because it pulled a get timeline the first time we use this, and now it's pushing through the pictures. But I'm going to go ahead and let's go look at the other one. You can see the pictures are changing over here too on the big one. I'm going to click on that. and we'll be ready to run an order pizza. So I'm going to go ahead and push the order pizza button. That resets the timeline, and I'll hit Command-Shift-H. And you can see it's now starting with the pizza ordered, and then the making pizza, and the cooking pizza. And each one of these steps now goes ahead and shows us how this pizza is being handled. And then it pauses at enjoy and eventually goes back to order a pizza. So it's run through the entire sequence of the timeline. Now, this is only the beginning of using widgets. There's a lot more that you need to learn. And I just wanted to give you a very short taste in this mini course of what you can do with widgets. And you can get some of the basic things with just these few parts. So go ahead and enjoy playing around with some new widgets.